All right. Hi, everyone. We're excited to welcome you to the final workshop in our series, Research Statements, led by Jennifer Albanese, Director of the Writing Center. This session will be recorded and shared along with the slides. We'll also share recordings and slides from the previous workshops, including Faculty Job Market 101, Teaching Statements, CV and Cover Letters, and Diversity Statements. So please join us in welcoming Jennifer.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to start a screen share in just a minute. I just wanted to introduce myself a little bit more, let you know that I've been at Stony Brook for about 25 years, and I've been director of the Writing Center since 2015. And in that time, I don't necessarily have particular expertise in specific kinds of texts that we're talking about, even the one that we're talking about today. My expertise is sort of in deconstructing texts, looking at them rhetorically, and giving people sort of a model and a process for moving forward with creating their own. So I'm very happy to share what I know. I've built this into a little bit of a presentation that you guys can hopefully look at some models with me. I really would enjoy if people had questions. Feel free to put them in the chat. I've asked our coordinators here to pay attention to any questions that come up. I'm happy to be interrupted whenever you need to. And I'm going to pose some questions for you guys also, in addition to leaving some spaces here and there for you to do a little thinking about how your own research statements are going to play into what we've talked about here. So I'm just going to set up my screen share here. Okay. And go from here. Hopefully you can all see this. And I really just want to start. Oh, what's happening? Why am I not moving? Can you share? Let's try again. What is happening? All right, people, I am now locked for a second. What's happening? All right. I'm going to try this one again. Good. All right, we're good now. Somebody give me a thumbs up. Thank you, Molly. Okay. Okay. So move this away from me for a little second. Okay, so what I want to first start talking about a little bit is global issues in high stakes professional writing, which is what we're talking about today. And I know that you've done diversity statements, other kinds of work that you're talking about. And in my opinion, in Writing Center, these are the highest stakes work that we see. The personal statements that students are working on for grad school as undergraduates, but also the work that we see people working on for professional development, but also for certainly job applications and professional school. These are the highest stakes situations that we have, and you will continue to work in these spaces. The things that we talk about as global concerns, which is really the focus of today's presentation, is things like the organization or movement of a text. So this might be something like a grant proposal, an article, a research statement like we're talking about today. But this is when a writer tries to repurpose sometimes an existing document to save time and effort, and they often sort of miss fine distinctions between different genres. Local concerns might be things like sentence level choices that impact clarity and cohesion of writing, but we're not really talking about those things today. We're really looking at rhetorical cues that help create better writing by thinking about the kinds of text that you have. Oh my goodness, again, what is going on with my screen share? Once again, I am locked in. Okay, I've got to stop screen share again. Okay, not sure. Okay, looks like that's going to be a frequent problem. So missing the interpersonal is something that we just want to talk about a little bit before we start looking at examples. Sometimes in making that transition from disciplinary writing like published research into professional writing, including things like cover letters, research statements, teaching statements, writers forget to consider how audience influences authorship. So Kenneth Hyland's article in particular, Constructing Proximity Relating to Readers in Popular and Professional Science, talks a little bit about this conversation and authorship. Over the last 20 years, analyses of academic texts have shown us that while they may be more lexically dense, cautious, and nominalized than other kinds of writing, they aren't completely author evacuated. So in other words, while professional research writing might de-emphasize the subjectivity of writers in order to emphasize, let's say, the objectivity of research methods, the business of delivering information relies on interpersonal exchanges between writer and reader like any other kind of writing. So this explicit system of meetings link the participants in a text as interactants, adopting an acceptable persona and a tenor consistent with the norms of any professional community. And once again, I am locked. Okay. This is so frustrating. I'm so sorry that my screen share, I don't know what it is doing. Every time. Okay. Hyland uses the term proximity to talk about interpersonal exchanges. And in particular, he talks about proximity of membership. So for example, how an academic writer demonstrates their authority to colleagues through the use of disciplinary convention. What does the writer do to position himself or herself as a disciplinary expert and competent colleague? So for example, we know that graduate students operate in a liminal space between student and colleague. Postdocs are in sort of the same situation sometimes. In addition to the content and quality of research, your belonging is signaled by familiarity with conventions, including the genres or kinds of texts that you're producing in your academic and professional career. So this requires sort of a reader-oriented view of writing. So thinking about how does writing figure into your sense of belonging or your proximity to a career space? How might writing a strong research statement, for example, improve your chance of earning a position at a desired institution? How might contributing to or leading successful grant proposals help you distinguish yourself in a new position? These are all contingent on your understanding of rhetorical conventions, of disciplinary writing that establish proximity of membership. So that's really what we're looking at. Nope. No idea. Okay.
Jen, would it be easier to share your screen in like while you have slides up? Instead of going
That's what
full
I'm
screen?
doing. I have it in 2 different screens. I've tried, Ashley. I don't
Okay.
know.
All
Like
right.
I've not had this problem before. Do you have another thought?
Well, so do you have it in full screen mode or do you have like PowerPoint up?
I have it in, I had it in a regular tab and then I've
Okay.
just pulled it up the way that I have always.
Okay. Yeah,
Does
I'm
that
not,
change anything for you?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I've not had this before. In fact, I just did this in a personal meeting room and it came right up. So I'm
Okay.
not sure. It's a little frustrating. We can keep moving. Okay. The last part I just want to talk about before we look into a particular example is to give you a sense of how I've actually put together the structure for today, including thinking about what we're calling moves. So professional writing and moves, establishing proximity, let's say in a discipline, right? Belonging means first recognizing and engaging in existing genres by recognizing these as discrete moves or actions that a writer takes to fulfill reader expectations. So I most often talk about this when I'm working with graduate student writers, and we're talking about things like articles. Let's say, for example, professional science writing is going to have broad structural features that we all recognize, dividing, let's say, a text into introduction, discussion, results, etc. But you can also think about the way that a joke or a joke book might be divided into different kinds of texts, knock-knock jokes, limericks, etc. Fine structural features are those pieces that have to happen. They're patterns of organization within texts and within sections. So these fine structural features we might call moves. So writers who make use of conventional moves in their written work meet the organizational expectations of an intended audience. So most moves are required, the genre be incomplete or unrecognizable without those features. So for example, I always have students, we start, by thinking about knock-knock jokes in particular. Those are great ways to think about moves because you understand that if you say knock-knock and no one responds, the joke is over. It's immediately failed, right? Because you have a series of movements that are expected in order for this text to actually be successful. I'm not even going to, oh, look, this time it worked. Another way to think about moves is a metaphor of chess. may be a better way to think about it. So the gameplay is a strategy, and each choice or action moves the game forward closer to that goal, for example, of capturing the king. So, for example, in the Queen's Gambit, which I'm not a chess player, I don't know if you are, I just sort of picked a famous one and navigated around the Netflix series of the same name. A famous chess strategy, the first 3 opening moves are designed to create a sacrifice that allows one player better control of the center. So this is adversarial, which our texts hopefully are not, and hopefully your research statement is not. But the concept of moves works the same way. So what is the right opening that targets the established goals of your writing? That's what we're really thinking about when we talk about moves. So before we look at this example, one more thing. Rhetorical goals of that research statement. So planning for this opening move requires a really good understanding of what we're calling audience, purpose, and genre. And I call this slide audience. I have one for purpose and genre too. But I want to think about these 4 questions and see what you think about these. So before going in to write something like a research statement, who is going to read this text? So for example, how do hiring committees operate in higher education? And I think this is an important question that you have to know before certainly going on a job market is how do they actually operate? Who goes onto a job committee? How does someone on a hiring committee read a text? So for example, if you're imagining that as a physics or biochemistry postdoc, that you're only going to encounter people who read your research statement who are within that discipline, that is not true. It doesn't mean that you should simplify your research statement. I'm not suggesting that, but the moves have to be consistent with a broader audience because you need to know that in higher education, hiring committees are varied. They are diverse groups, okay? Is this audience, again, exclusively within your discipline, and does that matter for the framing of this piece? Aside from the basic content of your research, what you're working on, what are you trying to communicate or signal to that audience, which I think is most important? And how can this text help reinforce content in other sections of your application for this particular audience? And I think that's another important way to think about this. So the primary goal of this text might be communicating work that you've done in your research experience, but there's also secondary goals that are really important and have to inform the organization and structure of this piece. So knowing as much as you can about that audience is a critical piece. Maybe the most obvious part for our conversation today is to think about purpose, the rhetorical goals of research statement as part of a larger application package. That research statement is an opportunity to do 4 particular things: to identify professional research goals, to remind readers about professional progress, steps already taken toward those goals, to reinforce fit or readiness of current research for the advertised position, and to connect, if possible or reasonable, with institutional goals, specific or broad ones. So these can be touched on in the research statement, but also developed in other portions of an application package, obviously including a cover letter or teaching statement, depending on what your research is and what those institutional goals in particular might be. But I think if we think about those 4 pieces in terms of purpose, it's easy to go through an existing research statement and then start to build a model for how you might move forward. The last step, so we talked a little bit about audience, we talked a little bit about purpose. Now I just want to stick for a second to genre. So audience and purpose help writers find the right genre, in this case, our research statement. So a genre is a type of writing that comes with a set of preconceived expectations. So when you publish your research, obviously in a peer-reviewed journal, you immediately recognize expectations for the organization of the text, again, depending on your discipline-specific area, right? So you might have something that looks like this from the New England Journal of Medicine that has an abstract, introduction, methodology, et cetera. There's obviously discipline-specific vocabulary, formal citation style, et cetera. Your NSF grant proposals have precise formats which require applicants to consider intellectual merit, broader impacts, et cetera. So even simple texts like menus, recipes, emails are also genres with set expectations. So recognizing and attending to these expectations helps establish your proximity to a community of writers. So I just want to stick for 1 second to this conversation because there's another side of this, which is sort of leveraging the wrong genre on purpose. And I don't know that that's helpful here, but I just did this yesterday, so I figure this is maybe a relevant moment to have this conversation for such a sophisticated group. But I wrote an email the other day to my son's school district, and sometimes I write emails, but sometimes I write letters and attach them as PDF files to emails. And I think about the ways that that is an interesting sort of genre play. It changes how that reader, that particular audience, engages with my text. It makes my email more serious. It changes the tenor and it just sort of changes the entire conversation a little bit by shifting sometimes the genre in a slightly different way. So I think one of the things that I do a whole lot is to think about the ways that we can modulate genres in certain ways that better suit your style or your intent behind it. You've got to know what you're doing in order to make that work. But almost every genre that we talk about has these elements that can be subverted in certain ways or sort of intentionally used or framed in certain atypical uses that can still be valuable. So the most important thing I really want to get to is I want to start looking at a particular research statement. I'm going to give you a minute to look at the one that I've posted here. But I wanted to subdivide it according to those purposes that I offered in the other slide. So while there are no formal sections or official subdivisions in a research statement, as you might see in another genre, writers can develop their own moves to help meet rhetorical goals and reader expectations. So one of the things that is really useful in every text, and I think I mentioned this later in the presentation, this is 2024. You are going to work for many, many years. And in the time that you're working, new kinds of texts will emerge. So what's important is not necessarily learning a particular text, but learning how you might explore a text in order to subdivide it for future reference, right? You've got to know how to look at those samples, break them down so that you can recreate the same structural elements, right? So for example, we can return to the purpose of that document and label these 4 goals for research statement. But before I even do that, I just want to put a question out to you guys, not a rhetorical question. So I would love if anyone has an answer. These goals contribute to an argument about the job candidate. What is the argument? Anyone have thoughts? Feel free to unmic.
To me, it's really the third component that you are the best fit. Because everything, it's kind of like, let me be whimsical and show you how what I'm doing relates to your institutional goals and what's most current and what's happening specifically at this place. But it's really about like that fit. That to me, like the argument is like, I am a candidate that fits well with you, and I will learn from you and you will learn from me.
Absolutely. So I might, for example, in a cover letter, identify if I were applying to a particular institution, I might sort of be able to reference people who currently work at that institution or goals that I know about from that institution. But I might also leverage details in the research statement that move toward those goals, right? So I think you're right. The argument, again, that you're always making is that you are a good fit. Readiness, I think, is an important word here too. And I like that you mentioned in rhetoric, we call this kairos, like the timeliness of this moment. Why are you the candidate right now to kind of join this institution and be able to, why is this the right moment in your research where gaining this position or access, let's say, to your own lab, to your own work environment is going to make a difference, let's say, in the work that you're doing right now. So I think there's a real readiness piece to it. The other piece that I think, and I looked at a few research statements in exploring this for today, the other thing that I think is important is a lot of people, and again, you're all unique. I talk to different people in different disciplines at the university. A lot of people are coming from a space where they have worked in a PhD program under a PI, and they've worked as a postdoc under a PI, but they're applying for a position where you are the PI. This is a different move. This is a different space where you're going from, let's say, being in a guided space to being in a leadership position. So I think knowing that you can signal, let's say, not only in the research statement, but in other moments of the job application, how there's a fit or readiness, again, not only maybe in the content of your research, but where you are in terms of understanding that transition to a leadership position is a really good way to think about this. So all of the work that we're talking about today, when I set up purpose, is I'm saying your research statement has on the face this obvious moment of content that you're all quite familiar with. You've been doing your research because you're deeply engaged in this. But the argument of the statement is something a little bit different. It's setting up those professional research goals, reminding of the particular progress that you've made toward those goals, reinforcing your fit, as you said here, maybe the most important piece for that position. And then again, connecting with institutional goals to suggest that you are not only knowledgeable about this institution, but you are the right person again for that space. So I think linger there. Oh, I'm locked in again. I don't know. I'm going to come back. Don't worry. Screen share. I have no idea. Here we go. So again, just to reinforce, in case no one jumped in here, your job in developing that statement is to persuade readers that your research is ready to advance at a new institution because of work you've already completed. You've worked on a team under a PI. Now you're ready to take on a leadership goal, etc. Okay. So in the next slide here, what I'm doing is I've sort of color coded this because I can't help it. And I'm a little cute about how I do things. I'm sorry. But what I did here is I broke down this full research statement written by another postdoc alum that's been shared for this purpose here. And I broke this down into where you see those particular sections and this information at work. So really, I could have highlighted the entire paragraph, let's say pink. This is something that this paragraph is intended. It's the move. They want to start by identifying professional research goals. Then they want to remind readers this information happens in sequence. Okay, that's the notion of moves. These aren't 4 things that can happen at any time, but they're things that exist in a particular order on purpose. But what I tried to do here was I highlighted sections from the text that really play into those particular purposes, because it's not about the content of the research per se, but about how this information is framed. So I'm going to give you a moment to take a look at these first 2 pieces here and see if you agree with me that these are sort of the goals of these particular sections here as moves when you look at them. So I'm going to be quiet for a minute and give you a minute to read through this section. Okay, I have no idea how long that was or if that was enough time to read, but I get impatient, so I'm going to keep going here. Hopefully, you all agree there's a lot of specific language in this opening paragraph about identifying professional research goals. This is stylistic. Maybe you don't feel comfortable being so explicit. That's okay too. This can be done in different ways that sort of tone down the explicit statements. You don't need a statement. I'm not suggesting that. that says my long-term career goal is. But you certainly want to signal that you have long-term career goals, or that you have research goals that could be content-based, or that could be supporting, let's say, an independent laboratory, et cetera. So I think thinking about how you might, again, modulate that message for your particular use would be really useful. But think about the ways that this one is, again, identifying those research goals in the beginning. In this second paragraph, I broke down some bullet points under this one about reminding readers about professional progress, not only because it identifies things like particular labs where this student worked and how findings, let's say, were published in particular spaces. Maybe that's relevant to your particular work. Maybe it is not relevant to your work, and you have something that is just about how maybe one research goal led to another one. It could be anything that is less specific than the kinds of steps that are listed here, but because these are explicitly framed, it gives a good idea of the kinds of things that you might include and work toward. So this next paragraph here, again, still part of the same section, carries on from PhD work and thesis research to, again, another publication. So there's a transition at this point from one paragraph to the next that talks again about a transition between working in one space and working on another. So I really just want, take a look at this paragraph also, but then also pause to think about that implicit argument. So why would the audience be interested in steps taken toward publication or awards or new projects? This is information that's listed in other elements of the job application package. So what is the value of this for our implicit argument that we talked about a few slides back? So take a second to read this one, and then I'm hoping someone's going to answer. Give me some feedback.
I think it might be I'm a good investment. Like, I've shown to be somebody who can receive grant money, or
Right.
who is publishable and worthy of awards. So it's like there's like a momentum happening, like like don't miss out on this opportunity.
Yeah, momentum is a great word here, I think. Thinking about the way that it's looking at the way that one article leads to another, one presentation leads to another, one sort of award leads to another, right? There is a sense that you're at a point of success, and that there's ongoing work happening right now that can keep moving forward. So I love that word momentum. I think that's a good way to think about it. I was also thinking about infrastructure. So I don't know how you guys think about infrastructure, but this to me is the secret to the whole universe, right? Knowing how things work on the inside so that you can actually accomplish things, right? Wanting to do something is not the same as understanding how something is done. So having work that is publishable is different than saying you've navigated the publication process. Having the desire to work with undergraduates is very different than saying you understand how university structures set up opportunities and how they can be leveraged through, let's say, credit-bearing opportunities, things like that. To me, there's a difference between understanding what you want to do and seeing how it actually operates in an institutional setting. So to me, there's something about proposals, grant proposals. There's something about, thinking about things like GRFP and other kinds of opportunities that suggest that you're someone who can find opportunities, that's someone who can earn opportunities, and there's someone who knows something about the infrastructure of a system, I think is a really good thing to be able to suggest. So this one here, again, it keeps going. We have a long section. Maybe this is the most important section on reminding readers about particular progress. It is for this particular writer. There's a long section within this research statement. This is the most detailed section here, and lots of information about their work. But it starts again, my postdoctoral work is focused on this particular situation, tick bite site, et cetera. And then again, these studies were recently submitted as a first author publication, presented at this space, and a rationale for 2 NIH awards and 2 recent Research One submissions. So as you said before, this is not new information. This is, again, looking at how these steps going from thesis work, from PhD thesis work into postdoctoral work has actually given some momentum, I'll use your word again, to leverage what you know about succeeding within this space. So again, what is the value of tracing research from PhD thesis to postdoc work chronologically? This is a little bit of a different question. So why not just focus on current research, and what impact does this have on the reader and the writer? So any thoughts on this subject? Like why not just talk about what you're doing exactly right now? Why not start with postdoctoral work instead of thinking about transitions from doctoral work? Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Hello? Hello?
I think it serves a few purposes. One is that it shows that you have a deep interest in what you do and that it's sprung from many years of like, even if your route has been a little serpentine, it's always been leading towards what you're doing now, to show that there's like longevity to your work, that you won't get burnt out, that you're like really in it for the long term. And also from a narrative perspective, to tell a story. I think that's really important too, because it shows that like instead of like giving your life story, it's like, this is the life story of my research.
Absolutely. Francesca is my best friend here. So the two of us are going to get through the rest of the presentation. So this is what
Also,
exactly what you're talking about.
Jennifer,
Yeah.
also Anna says in the chat, you can demonstrate the progression of your thinking and personal growth.
I love it. Okay, both of those, great. That's the power of narrative, right? Narrative has this extra ability to help trace choices, right? And it does something really nice. Just the experience of writing a narrative and writing, let's say, a research statement is designed to kind of solidify this thinking for you. So one of the things that we talked about earlier was that, again, fit for the position. One of the things you're always doing, though, is convincing yourself that you are fit for this position or that you are at a particular place. Having to trace sort of your own goals and to set up a narrative in this particular way is also something that you do to kind of solidify your own thinking in this particular direction. Now, usually, and again, I'm speaking to the students and to the colleagues that I work with, but usually by the point of postdoctoral work, we have a pretty solid idea of where things are going. This isn't usually a real moment of diversion. But often I'm working with people at a lower level, and the same kinds of narratives are used to kind of justify, like, this is one possibility, right? This isn't necessarily the only possibility. This is one particular pathway. I have been studying this. I'm interested in this. I'm looking to move forward in this particular direction. There's something about this one in particular. This student is a biochemistry person, I think. And my understanding, even in just through reading through this one, is that, I have a core workload that I've been doing, talking about viruses, but I could be persuaded to work on different viruses. There's something about the pathway. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to work on Lyme disease. It doesn't mean that we have to be working on Zika. These are spaces and labs that this person has worked in. But there's certainly a way to frame this information in another way to say that this could be useful for other kinds of viral work too. So I think there are ways to think about the way that narratives can help you feel comfortable in those particular spaces. So I think all of those are good. Nope, locked in. Okay. Out and back in again. All right.
Also, I want to voice Joseph's comment. It communicates
Great.
progress and transformation in case you have changed research focus areas.
Absolutely. I think that's another great way to think about it, right? We want that to be part of a pathway. If there have been particular changes, I think that's great to be able to reinforce why those changes might have taken place or how they fit into that larger package, right? Especially if one thing is influenced another. I think that's great. This next section here, again, I'm going to leave you with it for a minute to take a look at it, talks about reinforcing fit or readiness of current research. So again, something Francesca mentioned from the beginning is maybe the most important purpose of this. This isn't a large section of the text, but you'll see that future research goals, for example, are identified here too. The other one that comes up in blue toward the bottom of this is connecting with institutional goals, which look, small. This is a small mention here toward the beginning, but I gave a short bulleted list here to suggest what these could potentially be at different institutions. So think about this one. So just read through this one little section quickly to see if you agree that these are met by the kinds of things that I've highlighted from this text. It's 11:37, so I'm gonna give you about 3 minutes just to kind of skim quickly.
So I mean, just to answer your question, I think that
Sure.
the goals were met. But conditional on the promotion of research in the community means the student community. Because I could also see like the addition maybe of working with other faculty as kind of broadening the sense of community there.
Absolutely.
And I also have a question
Yeah.
about like the rest of the text that's written in white, because this might be the last slide and last opportunity to do so. So I'm
Yeah.
wondering if the text in white, which probably will be essential for everybody's research statement, is
Right.
that meant to essentially just signal competence to the committee, or is it, fluff? It can't just be fluff, right?
Yeah, no, the text in white to me, I left it in white because to me that is so individual to every individual researcher, right? So as a postdoc, for example, what your research is going to vary widely. So I'm just sort of taking sentences that I think signal the kinds of things we're talking about in purpose, and I'm using those as color opportunities, right? And the rest of it, I think, is really very much specific to your individual research. So to me, all of the white text is just reinforcing the detail that you need to communicate about your particular research. So it's meant to say that that's just sort of individual to you. I'm really looking at verbs, right? So I'm looking at, my future research goals are to characterize. So characterize the mechanisms. I'm looking at permit and regulate clearance, right? Like these are the things that are goals, right? They're designed to emphasize what is going to change in the research or how to move forward with the research, whereas other things might be focused on what we've learned or the results of research, things like that I left in white. So I was really just trying to narrow those details. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Awesome. So connect with institutional goals. I just want to linger on that one again. And I think faculty collaboration could be a really good one. I'm thinking about Stony Brook and our Research One institution here too. And certainly to me, a research statement that applied for a position at Stony Brook, talking about ways that hitting the ground running as a new PI in a lab, you would be thinking from the beginning about ways to bring students into that partnership, seems like a smart thing to signal. It's certainly a goal of the institution to create opportunities for undergraduates. There's also lots of opportunities or lots of desire at Stony Brook to help underrepresented communities make their way into spaces where they haven't received a lot of attention and a lot of opportunities. So I think those kinds of signaling institutional goals can be really easy to do and to frame that in ways that may have connected with previous research work also. So I think those are all good ideas. And I'm locked. Okay. One more. So you did not get your wish. There's more slides coming, just so you know. There we go.
Hey, Jennifer.
Yeah.
Frankie has a quick question.
Sure.
Or thought. For me, the community raises questions of what it means to be a public-facing scholar. So can the community be public health LI?
Oh, absolutely. I think you can define community whatever makes sense in your research space. In this particular case, it was so much about work with working on viruses in a very specific lab environment. But I think someone who's working in a humanities space, social science, public health, these are things that you would have to look at broader gestures. I think, or I'm using the word gesture since it's on this slide, but broader gestures toward community work. I think whatever makes sense for your particular research space, I think definitely. This slide here, just talking about gestures, I wanted to include this, and only because to me, when I read through this section, in particular, this section in blue about institutional work and thinking about that really connects with the way that we think about broader impacts sometimes in other grant proposals. So I just want to see that, or I would like you to see that those kinds of things are sort of gestured to here. They're not explicit and not necessarily part of that research statement, but I think it suggests to me in reading this that this is someone who has written those kinds of statements before. So in reading through the research statement, I recognized elements of other kinds of writing, other features that we would see and let's say might be associated more specifically with a research proposal or a formal research proposal. And that made me feel good too. Like that to me was a positive reference because it gave a sense that this is someone who has also used or thought about their work in ways that are sellable to other grant-bearing institutions. So I think that was useful. What I wanted to do, just because I'm looking at the time, it's 11:43, is I would like you to look at a totally different research statement. So the two examples that I was given to look at this to break down, I chose to use the other example to break down these four particular purposes that I think are going to be important for every student looking at writing a research statement. But there's another one that really takes an incredibly different approach. So I really wanted to give you guys a link to this. So I think, I don't know if you can get straight from my slide because I'm doing the screen share, but if I go back to stopping the share for a second and just go into the chat, I'm just going to put the link in there, and hopefully you all have access to it. I was careful about access, but sometimes I get it wrong. Okay. Okay, so if you just take a look at that file, looks like I've got people there now, so you've made it into the file. Awesome. Okay, everyone. So in the interest of time, What I wanted to do was just have a really quick discussion, questions after the reading. What was the writer's opening move? Was this move successful in meeting the goals? Which goals were well addressed, which could use more attention? Could this writer have borrowed from a different or closely related genre? So I stopped the screen share, just figuring that we're looking sort of at different documents at this point, but I also put the slide presentation, the full slide presentation into the chat. So if you want to open that one, you can see those questions listed there. But I'm interested to know what you think about how this student met those goals or did not. I'm calling it a student, I'm sorry. This postdoc.
It's a little hard for me to tell, which makes me think that greater structure and clarity could be beneficial, because as somebody who doesn't know anything about that field, it came off as, like, on the one hand, very informative. Like in the chat, I said it kind of, the beginning almost felt like a TED Talk opening. But on the other hand, I was like, maybe it's too in the weeds and not enough like about just, here's the gap, here's where I'm filling it, like here's why I'm a good fit. Like it was a little bit too expansive maybe, but I'm not sure.
I think your instinct is right, to say that this is a piece that probably could use a little bit more structure or tailoring toward the particular goals that we set up here, right? My last question that I just said, and I know I said it out loud, unless you're looking at those questions on the slide presentation, my last question was really, is it possible that this text maybe was borrowed from a different genre? So to me, looking at this piece, I see a research proposal that's oriented as a research statement. But those two texts have different goals. They have different audiences, they have different goals, and they have different purposes. So I think the things that we talked about here, if you really went through and looked at sort of our color coding situation, you would start to see that there are details within this text that hit those moves that we talked about. There are moments where fit is addressed. There is a conversation about what work undergraduates might do, for example, toward the research. I think that's a good potential statement toward fit, or thinking about institutional goals, or meeting kind of that larger, understanding of how a PI might address this versus someone who is just working within a lab structure. So I think there are attempts to hit those things. I think they're not explicitly framed in ways that would be as successful as the one that we looked at first. Anyone else have any comments on this one? Do you see potential for this one to maybe take a little bit more shape, thinking about the way that this, again, proposal, it may be very far from the work that you're doing, but thinking about the way that this could be reshaped or retailored to really better emphasize those particular goals that we've talked about? You can also write in the chat, by the way. Once I'm off full screen, I can actually see the chat much better.
I was wondering, like, what do you think about people who use figures or images in this genre of writing? Is it effective, or can it sometimes be a little bit disconcerting?
So to me, that's another signal that it's probably coming from another genre space. I don't think that that's consistent with a research statement, not in my experience. If anyone else wants to jump in here and say they've seen others that sort of look like this, I think it is a repurposed version. So I think it makes a lot of sense to use an image like this in a research proposal. I think it makes a lot less sense in a research statement. Which is less about the details of the research and more about the momentum, as we talked about here before, toward particular progress in those goals. So I completely agree. Okay. So I also just wanted to go, again, if you're in, I'm not going to reshare again, but if you are in my slideshow, getting started with research statements is mentioned here at the end. And I asked a few questions here, I think, that are important to think about before drafting. So to me, if you are someone in this situation, you are looking to start your research statement right away, maybe very soon, maybe this summer, maybe this fall. My argument would be that the first step today is to take some notes on those 4 goals. What are the things that you would want to communicate about identifying professional research goals, right? What are the things that make sense for you? To Francesca's comment in the chat, right? This may not work when you're looking at examples from sciences. Okay, so what are my professional research goals, for example, within the humanities? You've got to be able to make that shift in that transition. But sitting down with just those 4 categories and taking a couple notes is going to maybe get you there pretty quickly. Reminding readers about professional progress. What is the professional progress that you have made, right? So this person has some really detailed progress that they've included about publications and articles and presentations and awards. Maybe that's not you. Maybe your field also has a different kind of professional progress that you want to recognize in a different way. So I think thinking about professional progress as it suits your goals is going to be important here too. Thinking about fit or readiness, what does that mean for you? If you're someone who's been working under others, you've been in collaborative spaces, but now you're looking toward a leadership position as you move toward a professional space. What does that mean in terms of fit or readiness, and what have you done that really shows that space? And then again, if you're applying to particular places, what are those institutional goals? And that could be institutional goals for a particular location, but it could be that, let's say you're applying to all Research One institutions and they all have similar goals, right? So you may be thinking about broader goals for your discipline, broader goals for higher education generally, broader goals for particular kinds of institutions. So I think the first step is looking at that purpose, going through those and say, what are the things I would want to communicate about my particular situation? To me, the next step, again, this is in the slides, you can go back to it if you want, before drafting would be to identify a couple questions that would shape some decision making. So we want you to think not about following directions, right? So when we present writing process, let's say to undergraduates, sometimes we give them formulaic ways of thinking about things. And today's presentation isn't about a formula. I can't give you a formula for a research statement that's going to work for everyone in all disciplines, but I can give you some useful questions to think about that are going to fit with your writing style and your research work. So there are 5 questions that I included here just as examples, but there are ones that may have come up in your thinking just in looking at the ones that we've talked about today. So something like, should my research statement target a specific institution? Now, that first person in the example that we looked at was really specific in terms of how they thought about institutional application. They were looking really at one place. Does that make sense for you? Are you someone who is really looking to create a broader introduction? That's great. Do I need to include something like references? Again, the question about pictures and images is, I think, a great one. The reference conversation to me looks exactly the same as the picture. That to me is signaling a different kind of text. This isn't a moment to me for references. This is a moment for framing improvement, momentum, shifting transitions, establishing, where you are in terms of your career space. How many publications, presentations, grants should I mention? You may have felt that the first one that we looked at was a little showy. I don't know, maybe it was. Maybe this is more than you might want to include. Maybe you're someone who has racked up these kinds of things. Maybe you're someone who is not. But thinking about what the right sweet spot might be for you is a good question going in to think about. How do I connect thesis work with postdoc work if they're distinct and your trajectory has changed? And I think that is a question that came up a little bit before. If you're someone who started in a different space and postdoc has moved you into a different direction, do you want to then focus only on the postdoc work? Do you want to talk about that trajectory in terms of building a narrative? Do you see a close connection between those things? How can I emphasize my accomplishments, again, with humility, especially in working as a member of a research team? So maybe our first writer did a lot of independent work. Maybe they were really part of a larger team for these. And is that sort of communicated in that space too? So those questions that you identify as part 2 here will give you a sense of your unique concerns, and you'll return to those kinds of things too. So the last thing just to mention really quickly, again, it's the end of my slideshow, but I just, without having to read all of these sections here, to review what an effective writing process is. And again, for everyone working on research statements and beginning with this, taking a look at these models, if they're useful for you, number 1, good writing begins by audience. You have to know the audience that you're working for, who is going to read this. How are they going to understand the argument that is implicit in this text, not just the basic literal content that you're offering here? So you want to make sure you're thinking about who the audience might truly be. Good writing involves attempts to recognize and address knowledge gaps as part of that pre-writing process. So sorting out genre expectations is important, right? You are going to be asked as your career develops to write in different genres that do not yet exist. And you need to be able to look at those kinds of texts, be able to understand quickly what makes sense in terms of framing that information, and what are the way that we talked about subdividing it, what are the rhetorical moves that those writers make in order to meet those genre expectations. 3, connect with low stakes readers. If you're part of a writing group, if you have a set of peers that you share writing with, if you want to go online and find other postdocs who are preparing job materials and sort of think about ways that you can share writing and share conversations about this, you need useful editorial feedback from people who cannot evaluate you. Think about peers in your postdoc community. I gave the other example, research training initiatives, Center for Inclusive Education. They are spaces that have peers for you to potentially connect with, so that you can look at each other's, let's say, low stakes writing at that moment, before it gets to someone who can actually have an impact on you. 4, challenge ideas, wrestle with choices, don't accept people's edits. Right? People are going to give you editorial feedback. You know this from doing dissertation work. Hopefully you are not someone who accepted edits, but really thought about what is going to represent you correctly, your research correctly, your work correctly. You are in charge. So these are parts of the ways that you develop strong communication skills as pathways for building confidence. You have to be able to wrestle with choices and say, you know what, that might sound better, but it doesn't sound like me. And that's an important part of writing process. And the last part of this is I put a little picture in here about this distinction. I use this at all levels, the difference between what we think about as a good linear writing process. This is what most people think writing looks like, and really what it truly looks like, which is a recursive process, right? So we think about brainstorming, then drafts and final edits, and make final additional edits, publish the work. That is not really how text works. It's not really how writing works, right? It really is a much more complex recursive process where you have brainstorming, drafts, edits, revisions, and many of these things happen not necessarily in your writing and on a page, but in your mind. I tell people all the time, much of my revision, definitely my brainstorming, happens when I'm in the car. It happens when I am in the shower. It happens when I am trying to sleep in the middle of the night and I have to get up and think about what I actually want to do. Some of it happens on the page too, but don't discredit that kind of brainstorming. That's really creative thinking. And if you do something like look at a text, read through a text, and give yourself a day or two to think about it, those revision thoughts, those reiterations are going to come back to you. They're going to invade your thinking because these are important documents for you. So think about those 5 elements. They are going to carry you forward not only from postdoc work, but into professional career, and certainly in other spaces that may not seem professional, but will be high stakes writing for you in the future too. So think about those things. So it is 12:01. I want to be respectful of time. So I want to thank you guys for showing up today. You can always reach out to me. You can email Jennifer Albanese and I will be happy to answer any questions that I can. Francesca had posted before about additional samples. I don't know what samples are available. This is not a cache of samples that I have and could collect and share with you. But the 2 samples that we looked at today came from Lisa Hospital. So if you do want to investigate future samples, seems like that might be a place to go and see if there's more information there to take a look at. And again, happy to answer any questions that you have.
Got a quick question in the chat.
Yep.
How should DEI considerations come up in the research statement, particularly if there's no diversity statement in the application? And also, do you offer one-on-one sessions to review these statements?
So, oh my goodness, these are really quick. So this is an interesting political question. Let me start with that because I'm thinking about the presidential debates tonight. And I'm thinking, I was just at a conference in April where many of the I actually went to a panel that talked about higher education potentially post DEI. And this is a conversation that I don't even know sort of how to initiate with you guys or discuss, but I think you should be aware, right, that this conversation is out there. And depending certainly on the results of future elections and beyond, conversations about DEI are really interesting ones. My feeling about this is that information that is passionate to you. So you are someone who has your own feelings about diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? That information can be signaled without that term. And my personal feeling, if I were going on the job market tomorrow, and potentially applying to schools that may be in spaces where this political situation is less clear, I think I would emphasize what is true to me in my experience and my goals and values. And I would not necessarily use an acronym if it is not referenced directly in the package. That would be my personal advice. So I don't know if anyone else has other feelings about that one. I think you have to sort of follow the unfortunate trajectory of the world at this moment and think about how that plays into a larger conversation. The one-on-one session is interesting. We're actually, Molly can maybe speak to this. We're having like a transitional moment. We do have a graduate coordinator position that we are trying to reorganize and figure out, I think, beyond this. I think it would be great to imagine that our graduate coordinator might be someone who could definitely look at research statements, maybe have this conversation, maybe meet as a group with a few of us, and then feel confident moving forward back into different departmental spaces to work potentially with postdocs who are moving into the job market moment. So at this moment, we don't have this well organized, I'm going to be honest with you, but I think by the fall we could. And this is a conversation that if there's a great need for this or any need for this, right, I think we can figure out how to do it. So definitely if you are in this situation and let's say it is August and you need this information immediately, you're working on this statement, it's important to have it done for you for some important deadline in your life. I think reach out to somebody, reach out to Molly, reach out to me, reach out to whoever seems appropriate. They can connect us and we can always find resources that work for individuals. Whether or not we can kind of find an institutional situation where we can say, let's have 20 people sign up, that's a little bit different. So I would say reach out to the people that you know at this point if you are looking for that support, and we can figure it out. Okay.
Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, great. I hope everyone has a good afternoon.
You too.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.